Hi everyone. Time for cognitive development in middle adulthood. Hopefully, so far the lectures have been good and not too choppy and not too boring. Um, I'm sure that you guys are all still enjoying at this point in the semester seeing these happy, smiling stock photos on the first slide for um, this different ages in development. This is actually the first time I've paid any attention to them, and they all seem a little too happy. Maybe they just really like learning about human development. What do you think? Um, so let's get started, um, and hopefully this slideshow will be somewhat interesting for you guys. And I'll let you know along the way if there will be any discussion boards that you need to answer. So there's a lot of differences in middle adulthood when it comes to cognitive changes. There are a lot more opportunities that we see coming up as we get older. Um, in middle adulthood, there's a lot to juggle as far as someone's job. You might have community activities in middle adulthood, and then there's also still a lot in the home. Most middle adults are still parenting children. Um, they they might have children that are in middle school or high school, and then they might be also going through the phase of life when children are starting to leave the home and go off to college and adulthood. So, as far as changes in mental abilities, there are some things that occur during this age range. Studies show, as far as IQ is concerned, that longitudinally there is age related increases in IQ, but when they do cross sectional studies, there's an IQ peak at 35, and this is followed by a steep drop. The reason behind this isn't because adults are not as intelligent. It's more because there has been an increase in health and education in younger generations. So to go into this a little bit further, cohort effects are largely responsible for the difference. What we see in the cross-sectional research is that each new generation that was tested in this study experienced better health and education than the one before. Also, the tests that were given made tap abilities less often used by older individuals that no longer require utilizing some of the skills that younger individuals are currently using. So here is a graph looking at the differences in verbal ability in age in the cross-sectional studies versus the longitudinal studies. And your textbook talks a little bit more about this if you're interested in learning more. These studies also look at fluid and crystallized intelligence and the differences in intelligence as we age. I apologize that there is a photo on the bottom of the slide that's kind of over a word. I adjusted it, but it decided to change again when I started recording this presentation. So as a reminder, fluid intelligence is dependent more on information processing and looking at the relationships between things visually and how fast we analyze information and the capacity of our working memory. So it's basically our information processing skills and how quickly we can process information and retain it in a short amount of time. Crystallized intelligence is that accumulated knowledge and experience, our judgment, our reasoning, the mastery of this different social conventions and norms that we've acquired because we have life experience. Um, so we see that this gets better as we age. So a lot of the studies show that crystallized intelligence increases steadily through middle adulthood and fluid intelligence starts to decline in the 20s. There's been a lot of studies looking at this. And once again, there's some cohort effects here. Um, the midlife rise in crystallized abilities tends to make sense for us because the more life experience you have, and the more knowledge that you're adding into your life, and the more that you're adding crystallized skills that are practiced. And as far as the decline in fluid reasoning, once again, there's more of a decline because we're not using that fluid intelligence as much possibly when we age. So, so as far as this study is concerned, this was Sashi Seattle longitudinal study. There were 5 factors that were looked at in this study that are gained in early and middle adulthood: verbal ability, inductive reasoning, verbal memory, spatial orientation, and numeric ability. And all of these include both our crystallized and fluid skills. The paths of change that you see in this confirm that midlife is a time when some of the most complex mental abilities are at their peak. So, according to the findings, middle aged adults are intellectually in their prime, and not, as sometimes we see stereotypes saying, are over the hill. So, there again, you can see that, especially with things like perceptual speed, middle adults are in their prime, their cognitive prime during this time. So, adults in middle adulthood, as far as individual differences occur, we see that there are certain things that help us maintain our intelligence as we age. One of the biggest areas is our lifestyle and personal factors. So, it's the use it or lose it principle, which I believe Dr. Starling must have talked about prior. That the more you use certain skills, the stronger they will be. The less you use certain skills, the more likely you are to lose the abilities to do so. This is that whole brain in idea of that when you're using neurons, they're growing and making more branches, and when you're not using neurons, they tend to prune back and you lose the abilities in those pathways that you previously had. Differences are also based on our education level and if we're continuing to work, if we're continuing to do things that challenge our intellect, like playing games, or as you can see here, there's a crossword puzzle. Staying physically active is also a major thing. So if you're like this groovy man down in the corner and you're sitting on a balance ball and lifting weights, you're in good shape. Having a college education is also important. And if you can sit in front of a giant computer monitor like these guys here in the left corner, you're in good shape as far as lifestyle and factors are concerned. I apologize if you just heard that dinging sound. That's somebody messaging me on my computer, and I can't turn off the sound on here while I'm recording. So hopefully people will not continue to do that. It's also seen that if somebody is positive and has a more flexible personality, meaning that they're more likely to use that problem-centered coping style and take things in stride when there's an issue, they're much more likely to do better. We also see people that are in better health and have a higher socioeconomic status tend to strive better with intellectual skills than those who are in poorer health or have lower SES. There's also cohort effects here as far as individual differences are concerned. And that's basically, when this is concerned, that we call it the Flynn effect, which is that the individuals that are aging now are more intelligent than the generations prior to them, because we have better reasoning and we have, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. That we have better reasoning and we have different life experience and better life experience in some cases that has led to those who are currently in young adulthood and reaching middle adulthood are more intellectually intelligent with fluid and crystallized intelligence than other cohorts that are older than us. Sorry for the hiccup there. So there are definitely changes in information processing as we age and the speed at which we process. And a lot of studies show that as processing slows, some of our executive functioning changes. So that includes things like our attention and working memory. However, as adults hit midlife, they have more cognitive competence and they're growing in cognitive competence and increasing their knowledge and life experience, and that helps them problem solve in everyday life. So as far as speed of processing is concerned, we see that response times on tasks that involve quick response times increase from from 20s to 90s. So as we get older, from the age of 20 up to the 90s, we get slower at responding in situations where we have to make decisions or figure out what to do next. Why do you think that would be problematic? What things can you think of that would slow us down? If when we slow down would cause an issue? I'm not going to do a discussion board for this question, but I want you to think about that in this moment and think what types of skills might become problematic for us if our speed of processing slows down. There are basically two views which we believe that look at the causes of the slowing. So one of those views is the neural network view, and that's the idea that as the neurons in the brain die, breaks in our networks occur. So the brain adapts by forming synaptic connections, and we know that as we use our brain, we form new synapses, and there's more connections and communications as we're using our brain in different areas. It's the whole use it or lose it principle, that the more we use our brain, the more networks there will be. And the neural network view states that neurons in the brain die, and when they die as we age, there are these breaks in our neural networks, and that there's less efficient connections being formed as we get older. So this is part of the problem. When we were younger and forming connections, they were efficient and they could do their job, but as we age, they become less efficient. So the thought is that there's also other things that go on in support of this hypothesis, that there's withering of the myelin sheath on our neural fibers, especially in areas like the frontal lobes and the corpus callosum. The frontal lobe is where a lot of our problem solving and thinking occurs, and the corpus callosum is the connection between the two halves of the brain. So the two halves of our brain aren't communicating as well to each other when this occurs. There also is reduced cerebral blood flow that can be caused, especially if we're not in great health. And so those are some of the things that we see happening if we're supporting the hypothesis of the neural network view. Another approach is the information loss view, and this suggests that older adults experience a greater loss of information as it moves through the cognitive system. So basically, as a result, our whole system slows down because it takes us longer to understand information and interpret information. So the example your text gives is making a photocopy of a copy, and every time you make a copy of a copy, it's less clear. And we can look at this in the same way as we look at our thinking. So with an older adult, we're basically trying to understand this information, and as we keep trying to understand the information at each step, it's getting less and less clear. So basically the connections aren't as strong between our different types of memory as they once were. So some things we do know about processing speed is that if we continue trying to do tasks that involve processing speed, and we're continuing to use that area of our brain, we're less likely to slow down, at least as much as individuals who don't use those components of their brain slow down. We do know that processing speed contributes a lot to our cognitive functioning as a whole. So if this slows down, it also will lead to declines in other areas. It leads to declines in things like fluid reasoning. It leads to declines in our memory and in declines in attention. So we're going to talk about some of the other areas that are affected when our processing speed slows down. And one of those ways is in attention. So in middle adulthood, we start to see difficulties in things like multitasking. Now, everybody thinks that they're so great at multitasking, but honestly, humans are not really made to multitask so much. We just think we're good at it. And there's some interesting studies that look at that, but that's for another class. But we get even worse at trying to multitask as we get older. We also have more difficulty switching attention between tasks. Connecting information, so networking one piece of information to another. When we have a new piece of information come into our brain, it's harder for us to associate that with an older piece of information. And we also have a harder time inhibiting our attention, when there's like a distraction or something like that occurs. Our working memory also changes during our middle adulthood. As a reminder, our working memory is that when we're retaining information and translating it to other parts of memory in our brain. So things like if you're given a list and you're trying to remember an entire list within a couple minutes, our abilities to do that changes. So these changes we see are because of a decline of use in memory strategies. So older individuals rehearse less than younger individuals. Partly because maybe their processing speed is slower. Older people can't repeat new information to themselves as quickly as younger people. So that can be part of the problem as well. So if you haven't talked about memory strategies before at Dr. Starling, which you may have in past sections of this course, memory strategies would be things like if you're, you have to remember eggs, bread, cheese, and milk in the store, you might go into the store and be like, okay, eggs, bread, cheese, and milk, eggs, bread, cheese, and milk, eggs, bread, cheese, and milk. And for a younger adult, that's a relatively easy thing. But as you age, that those strategies tend to get a little bit more difficult for us. Um, Luckily, there are a few changes in our factual memory, so our like book knowledge, our procedural memory, how to do things, and our metacognitive knowledge, which is our thinking about thinking. One other thing with memory is we see that there is a decline in being able to do well under time pressure. Younger individuals are better at doing tasks quickly when they know there's a time limit than older adults. So, also, we see that in middle adulthood, there are gains in expertise in problem solving. So, this is definitely partly because we have more life experience. We get better at practical problem solving because we can look at real world situations and figure out best how to best achieve goals that have a higher degree of uncertainty. Um, so, part of our ability to problem solve is because we have life experience, and the more life experience we have, the more expertise we will have in problem solving. So continued growth in this area leads to more cognitive potential. As a reminder, expertise allows us to have extensive, highly organized, and integrated knowledge base to support high levels of problem solving performance. As far as creativity is concerned, we do see changes in creativity in three specific ways. We see that we are more deliberate in how we are creative. We are better integrating ideas, and we're more altruistic. So, just to describe a little bit more what this means, in youth, when somebody's being creative, they're likely to be more spontaneous, and emotions get involved more. When we're older, we tend to be more thoughtful and deliberate in what we do and why we do it. We're better at integrating ideas because we have more extensive knowledge and experience with which that we can take information and combine it to make more creative works. And as far as altruism is concerned, we are more likely to use creativity to give to humanity and enrich the lives of others. Whereas when we're younger, we're a little bit more egocentric and concerned with our own self expression when we're being creative. Moving on to work and education. As far as job choice is concerned, the more our jobs use our cognitive abilities and the more we have to be flexible throughout the course of our careers, the more likely it is that we will continue to expand intellectually and be challenged as far as our cognitive functioning is concerned later on in lifespan. And lastly, as far as middle adulthood and cognitive development, we're starting to see an increase in adult learners than we used to. It's more likely for people to go back into the education system as adults. There's a larger increase in non-traditional students. We have a big program here at DeSales with adult learners, the Access program. And we do see that there's a lot more people who are trying to learn academically as they age. Of course, this can lead to some anxiety levels in the home. If individuals are part of relationships as they're returning to the school, returning to learning into school, there might be some restructuring that needs to be happening at home. I would think that this is less of an issue currently with adult learners, but as your textbook talks about, that there are still many role demands placed on women, and when women want to go back and get an education, this can cause problems in the home because the family has to shift to accommodate a woman's return to school. I know that this does happen sometimes, but I think with the change from having more traditional marriages to egalitarian marriages, hopefully this restructuring the home becomes more easy than it used to in the past. So that's it for middle adulthood's cognitive development. There's not going to be a discussion board for this section. Honestly, I didn't think of any areas here where I really felt like I needed you guys to respond. I just hope that you're all listening to this material as you're going forward and learning it. And please let me know if you have any questions as usual. And I will get working on the social and emotional development section and post that as soon as I can. Thanks so much. Bye.